Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast. I'm Scott Hambrick, and I have Emmet Penney with me. Emmet runs some seminars for us, and he has most recently concluded running a section on Euclid's Elements. You guys did, all of book one? Is that right?
Yeah, all of book one, the penultimate proof of which is the famous Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah, I love it that you wanted to do this. Well, originally we left out all of this kind of stuff. We left all of this out of our program because, frankly, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how we would address geometry in an online seminar format. And we just pulled out all of that kind of math, science stuff from what people normally would call the great books. And you contacted me and said, "Hey, I got an idea. I just want to run it by you." And I'm like, do it.
Yeah.
So tell people what that idea is, what you wanted to do there.
Well, I was never a math or science person when I was growing up. Now that I tutor high school kids, I'm reminded daily why I was not interested in that when I was a kid. But when I was in grad school at St. John's, I decided to challenge my preconceived ideas of myself and both of the STEM subjects and take a sort of intellectual history on math and science segment. The major portion of that was on Euclid and a guy with the last name Lobachevsky, who made some interesting maneuvers around Euclid later on in the 19th century. So one thing that I did know is that it was possible indeed to engage with some of this stuff in a seminar setting, like we do Socratically in Online Great Books. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to share with people the great fun I had, surprisingly to me, in working through book one of Euclid. And that's what I proposed.
So we sent a thin little volume of just this first, 46 proofs. Is that right? I think.
Yeah. It's just under 50, I think.
Yeah. So it's just a slim little book, maybe 75 pages, something like that. We sent that to all the people who signed up, all of our members who signed up for this additional work, in addition to maybe reading Plato or whatever else they were doing. And you guys met once a week, and at 7:00 on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
And we started off with just some definitions, and then you assigned a proof or maybe two to each of the members, and then they would then demonstrate them for their peers next week, right?
Yes. Yeah. And
in doing that, you guys got to kind of rediscover what Euclid discovered. And by the time somebody works through all of those proofs and gets to the Pythagorean theorem, then you own it. You don't just memorize it like a magic formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You know where it came from.
Yeah, and you know that, it wasn't pronounced algebraically back then. That's not, the Greeks didn't have algebra. You know, so all of this stuff is done in sometimes a way that feels tedious, right? Because you're using words, you don't get to use algebraic symbols to write this stuff out. It makes you appreciate what an incredible life hack for math algebra proves to be. But you also understand why things that are just given to you in high school as true, why those things are, how they came to be, at least in the West. There is evidence that some of the native tribes in the Southwest of America, I think the Pueblo or something like that, had something like the Pythagorean theorem, right? Which is interesting. We have shared rational insights as human beings, proved in different ways. But yeah, you get to see why that is the case. Side angle side. Wait, now I know why that is. It's not just somebody telling me. If we think that these rational pursuits are the activities of free people, you are then free to understand in your own terms how this works.
So why do you had told me on the phone once why you thought it was so important for people to study Euclid? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that conversation.
So there are probably people thinking, "Gosh, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not an engineer. I'm not even a carpenter. I don't have to, construct trusses. What do I care about these angles and sides and all that?" And you make a good case for why everybody should care.
Yeah. Look, this is a process of thinking. This is about honing your insights. When we talk about the great books and the liberal arts traditionally, these are not siloed sectors of human investigation, right? These things have a relationship with each other. And if you are skeptical of the fact that this might be something for you or not, or how capable you are, one of my hot takes is that if you have read the Iliad, you are prepared to think geometrically, right? To think like Euclid. And I'm going to provide an example, right? So this is from the Caroline Alexander translation of the Iliad, and it's at the end of book 5, when Paeon is healing Ares after a battle. And here's a nice little piece of figurative language. As when fig juice hastens the curdling of white milk, which is liquid, but instantly thickens as one stirs, so then he instantly healed furious Ares. All right, why do I bring that up, and what does this have to do with geometry? What I'm going to say is that that piece of figurative language has a rational process of understanding it, right? You start to understand that the wound is open, that the blood is liquid, that part of Ares has been made unwhole, right? It is now goopy. And as this stuff is mixed in with him, his body becomes whole again, thickens like curdling milk, right? That's the visual it's giving you. Now, when you go to Euclid and you see a line as a breathless length, you understand that that is not indeed literal, that is not the phenomenal world that you engage in every day, but you understand it metaphorically to represent exactly, or as close as possible, to what you're looking at. And this is part of how the maths and sciences are related to the humanities, is that they can be rationally understood and have similar criteria for whether or not they meet a mimesis, an imitation or approximation of what we experience in everyday life.
Yeah, when I worked through these first 46, I thought, holy crap, this is science fiction. Like this isn't really what's happening, right? There is no uh, uh, figure of breadthless width or what, there is no, like, it depends on what translation you see, but some of the translations will say a point is that with no dimension. Someone will say an indivisible, um, an indivisible dimension. Well, those clearly aren't, it's not true. These are figments, right? And they're just strictly ideas. So we take these ideas that Euclid defines, which don't really exist. Like, you can't go point to a Euclidean type line, and then we just use these ideas and just assemble something very beautiful that has huge explanatory power from figments. It's fascinating, and I yeah, so the storytelling that happens in, did that story actually happen? Did was he actually healed? Did that all actually take place? I don't know. But we're able to parse out a lot about what Homer. Well, we were able to parse out what Homer wants us to know from his language there, and we're able to do that with Euclid. Is that what you're
Yeah, a
getting at?
similar thought process. That's sort of what I'm getting at. Is that these pursuits are open to all, right? The maths and sciences do not solely belong to a vanguard of experts. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't such actual and important things as, vocational expertise, but to engage thoughtfully in discussion of them and to try and understand them is not unlike trying to do the same thing with a work of literature, provided you can apply yourself in a democratic setting. That's what I would argue.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always room for an expert to, focus in and become expert, right? To go to a depth of understanding that us other folks don't have time or need for, but this is available for us to dig into far beyond where Mrs. Gwynn had me dig into geometry when I was in the 10th grade.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, like, when we start to take a look at this relationship between like rationality and figurative language, right? And I bring that up because most people assign to poetry kind of this frou-frou, irrational ephemeral, something on the par of like useless mysticism, provided you're willing to buy in that there is a useful mysticism, I guess, to differentiate it from. And I just don't think that that's the case with poetry or literature at large. And I think it's a surprising comparison to make, but it helps you understand how important it is to look seriously at things like the truth of language and how it's being presented to you, because most of what you're getting in Euclid is language, right? Like the drawings you see in the book weren't actually in the original transcripts of the elements. Those have been given to us by scholars over long periods of time, right? I know we're not supposed to bring in current political stuff, so I won't, but I will bring up a writer that I think is chronically guilty of bad figurative language, and you kind of see through how unimportant it is to pay attention to this person, right? So Thomas Friedman is the guy, and he recently wrote some op-ed for the New York Times. I don't remember what it was. I don't know what his political stances are, but he tried to compare the GDP of America to a pie and different parts of a political faction's relationship to the pie. So certain type of conservative wants to grow the pie. Well, we're already in trouble here because you don't grow a fucking pie. That's just not what happens. Like that is already breaking down. And then by the time you get to it, I'm not going to bore you with the details. You are now confused. Well, that's not really the role of metaphor or rationality in life. It is supposed to bring a kind of clarity, which is not the same thing as simplicity, by the way. So this is what I mean when we think that there's something important about engaging in the world with these books, is that they give us the tools to be more thoughtful actors in the polis, the political realm, with each other.
Yeah. I always say that doing this work installs a BS detector, and so in your example there, I can't believe you said Friedman anyway. You zigged where I thought you were going to zag. I think you probably know where I thought you were going to zag.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Maybe.
But there's he smuggled in a lot there, right? The GDP is not a pie. And then everything after that gets pretty
right.
weird.
And you might be willing to grant him, like, okay, it's not a pie, but for the sake of this example, let's say it is, and I'm going to get something clarifying out of it. There's the leap of faith with any sort of metaphor, which is going to ask you to compare things that are going to surprise you, right? But that's just not what happened here.
Right. But when you walk step by step, hand in hand with Euclid, starting with a point is that which has no part, and then he builds on that and tells you that and shows you that a line is a breadthless length, and that the ends of a line are in fact points. He defines all of his terms very, very carefully, and then walks you through all of this, and then reveals, or together you reveal, this Pythagorean theorem. You see how you really how arguments are to be made, right? So if Friedman wants to do a better job, he needs to be a little more Euclidean maybe in how he makes his points. And and that's a high darn standard. We were talking about the social in economics is a social science. You talk about these sort of softer sciences. That's a really high standard to be Euclidean in that. But we got to have standards, and I think that's a pretty good one. And walking through all of this geometry, man, it instills that in us, and it's just so beautiful. We read Shakespeare, maybe, or you read. I love the literature that is in Plato.
Yes.
I mean, the arguments are wonderful. The ideas he delves into are amazing. But just as a work of just writing, it's fantastic. So is Euclid. I mean, the economy and the clarity of writing is unbelievable.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I like about it is it pushes you to the limits of language, right? How much can you express in language about this abstract term? How does that correspond to the real world? Which those are always great questions to ask of a piece of writing. How much justice does it do? "Quote unquote" reality is a great question. But I also think that another thing I love about Euclid and sitting in seminar about Euclid is that people start to understand, and I myself included, why certain things are assumed or presumed and which things have to be proved, manufactured, demonstrated, all of that, and what the difference between those things are, and where it gets fuzzy and gray. I mean, like I said, Lobachevsky, who wants to do things with Euclid's idea of parallelism, thousands of years later, ends up having some insights by rejecting some of what Euclid assumes that gives way to the theory of relativity later on. So it's important to realize that the maths and sciences are also their own debate and not necessarily a site of transhistorical ideal truth, right?
Yeah. One of the things that, gosh, I guess it irritated me the most about Euclid is pretty early on. You see that he's bumping up against these ideas of the infinite, and typically on the small end of the infinite scale, not the big end. And language fails, and he's talking about things that are these figments, and I'm kind of a big T truth kind of guy, but I was like, man, he's skating on some really, really thin ice here. And I've always been skeptical of like non-Euclidean systems. But after delving into this more on my own, I ain't no more. I can see how this is how people are bumping and running with this for thousands of years, and why they're going to continue to do that. But it's there, and it's clear, and it's there for everybody. I hope some people listen to this and want to try it out and go pick up a Green Lion press copy of Euclid and get their pencil paper and their straight edge and their compasses out and get their ass to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did the people? How did our readers? How did they fare? I didn't stick with you.
Very well. I mean, you run into the normal problems you run in when you start a group endeavor. Some people drop off before the end or early on because their lives change, or because it's not exactly what they expected in terms of workload, or whatever. I mean, we're all busy adults, right? But the crew that stuck with it ended up developing a very savvy relationship with the work and with the text, and it started to help them reconsider received notions that they had, or produce new questions about the truths in the maths and sciences. So I think everybody did really well and was very courageous in doing it, because it can get overwhelming to try to memorize something to the best of your ability and then reproduce it in front of a group of people, even if it's over something as mediated as Zoom, right? So I was...
Yeah, we do the electronic equivalent to walking up in front of the classroom and doing this stuff on the chalkboard for the rest of the class. And It's a little nerve wracking. You got all these people watching you, and they've got the book in front of them, and you're trying to reproduce it from memory, or maybe hopefully not even memory, right? Hopefully they actually, you know, uh, prove the postulate, you know, organically. That's even better, right? Than just memorizing it and coughing it up. Hopefully they're able to actually do the thing, right? To recreate that process. But either way, we'll take it. Anyway, that's nerve wracking. You're thinking in front of people.
It's difficult.
It's
Yeah, so I
it's
think
hard.
the workaround for that in seminar is that you try to create an environment where it's not just a bunch of silent spectators, but participants in your success, right? So if you get lost or whatever, it's not wrong to ask for help or for someone to volunteer it. So you're not just suffering and flailing in front of a bunch of people. And oftentimes when that happens, people are more willing to admit that there are places where they also got stuck or they also had a hard time understanding the proof. And then you have a Socratic conversation on your hands about what actually is going on in the proof.
Yeah, it's nerve wracking, and it's I don't know, it's a naked experience, you know, to go up there and think in front of those people. But like you say, they're in it with you, they're rooting for you. And the thing that you have trouble with, it's probably the thing they had trouble with too. Um, I ended up with a schedule conflict and couldn't go through all the sessions with you guys, and ended up doing this stuff on my own. Um, I
Yeah.
don't recommend it. Do it in a group,
Yeah,
way better.
and it's also a lot of fun, right? Because another thing you start to realize,
Yeah.
I had a faculty member at St. John say this, that doing Euclid was experiencing beauty without feelings. And
Hmm.
I brought that up when we were going through because some people would reproduce a proof, and the rest of us would all just be smiling because it was so slick and like so
Yeah.
orderly and tidy and thoughtful, or nuanced and tricky, that there was a kind of wiliness to the way other things got invoked. And that ended up being a source of great fun and excitement when you got through it because you could appreciate it um, philosophically and aesthetically, which I think is a surprising thing to feel based on how we're taught the maths and sciences throughout our lives.
Yeah. There's nothing beautiful or elegant about 11th grade algebra class.
No, I mean, there's also been a great deviation between these two things. Like Edmund Husserl points this out in his book, The Crisis of the European Sciences. He says at some point, science became philosophy's master, and then they started to deviate from each other. And he tries to reground science and philosophy. And for him, that's phenomenology. And I'm not going to get into that, but what I will say is that's at least culturally true, especially in America. You know, I remember watching this interview with Bill Nye where he's just like, yeah, why study philosophy? You know, you're reading Descartes, and he's like, is that a chair in front of you? And it's an incredibly embarrassing display of ignorance for a man who's so smart otherwise, because he owes his whole career to Descartes' insights, you know? And his whole tradition comes out of those insights. He would not be able to do anything he does without Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. So I think what's important is to remember that most scientists up until very recently had favorite philosophers or philosophical systems. I think Niels Bohr was basically a Platonist, you know, and that greatly informed how he went about his own work, you know. And I also think it makes us less condescending to the ancients. You know, Aristotle in his physics says, you know, a rock's natural place is the ground. And if you don't believe me, throw a rock up in the air 1,000 times, and guess where it's going to land? The goddamn ground. So there you go, QED. And a tutor of mine at St. John said, you know, I mean, how different is that from our own scientific method? He went out and demonstrated it empirically, and somebody got really huffy and was like, well,
Yeah.
you know, there's gravity. You know, this tutor had a science background. And he says, okay, what's gravity? And the guy recites the equation. He's like, no, 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 no. That's an equation to express gravity. What is gravity? And then the whole class was just silent,
There is
right?
a
So There you go.
There's a disrespect now for phenomenology, right? There's an experience of
Mm-hmm.
rocks being on the ground that's undeniable, but science would. I'm not going to say ignore, but they're not practical about that. And then somebody just gives you this 9.8 meters per second squared thing, which doesn't really mean anything. But the fact that rocks belong on the ground is meaningful to regular people. And I think that having a philosophical underpinning behind scientific endeavor was one of the reasons that we had so many earth-shattering scientific revelations in particularly like the 19th and the early 20th centuries. And in getting away from that, science has moved to this sort of
Mm-hmm.
positivism thing, where it's just we just collect more and more and more data, and through observing and analyzing data, we iterate into more accurate models. But you can't. It's hard to shatter a model through iteration. It's hard to make the quantum leap in understanding
Mm-hmm.
through
Mm-hmm.
iteration. You have to be an outsider looking in oftentimes to see the shortcomings in a model and be able to break that model and then come up with something completely unique with better explanatory power. And no, positivism, kind of this 20th century, big data kind of, and 21st century positivism, I think is less than, well, maybe not
I
good
mean, we could
even.
say at least, I think positivism has some other philosophical connotations that I don't feel equipped to tarry with here. But I think what we're both talking about, to use a different term that I feel is more specific, is scientism. A belief in science is the clearinghouse
Fair enough.
of all human truth. Plenty of people love this. Sam Harris loves this, which is amazing because he hates, metaphysics and theology. Yet I have a hard time understanding anything as mythical or self-deluded as believing you could just aggregate all the data ever done into a coherent story of human and universal life. Like that, like that's insane. You know, Also, it's a complete naivete about the institutions that create science and like all of their own internecine problems, right? So I don't want to get too far into that, but what I will say is that I very much agree with your point. Um, is that when science understood itself in relation to, not as arbiter of, the other parts of human life, it seemed to generate a lot of surprising um, and revolutionary ideas.
I've got a friend who's his name's Rick Shaw. He's a professional bassist. You may have heard some of his works on The Simpsons and other Fox television shows. He says that jazz lost its way when New York City instituted these cabaret laws, and they would charge tax to nightclubs based on the
Mm-hmm.
size of their dance floors. So they started getting rid of their dance floors, and when they did that, jazz stopped being about movement, and it stopped being about people interacting with each other, and it became an exercise in and of itself that the
Mm-hmm.
musicians did for themselves, right? And jazz lost its way, and science has kind of done that, in my opinion, where it applies less um, to explaining our phenomenology and uh, well, really making our lives better in a lot of ways. I sure do enjoy my penicillin, um,
I mean, I'm into nuclear
but
power and stuff like
um,
that. Like I'm not anti-science. I'm anti-scientism. In the same way, like I am not against expertise. I'm against arrogance.
yes, the scientism is the Ornette Coleman uh, of investigating our
Mm-hmm.
world around us. I think I don't like it, and that's why I like when normal folk dig into Euclid. You said about Aristotle and his physics. we do this Euclid work here, and then we pick up Aristotle, and he makes these sort of geometric and Euclidean arguments for
Mm-hmm.
ethical behavior.
Yeah, and the ethics.
And yeah, and I first read Euclid's Ethics. I'm sorry, Aristotle's Ethics
Mm-hmm.
before I had done this. And I remember some of that stuff zinging past me. I mean, some of it's very basic. You've
Mm-hmm.
got this mean and whatever. But I mean, I'm looking forward to picking that back up again, having wrestled with our man
Yeah,
Euclid.
absolutely. I mean, he has these geometric ideas in the Nicomachean Ethics about different types of justice and redistribution and restoration and stuff like this. And as happens in Aristotle, it can get pretty hairy in there and a little bit difficult to parse. So it helps to be initiated into the logic system that a lot of Greek thinkers were a part of back then, which is Euclid. I mean, also Aristotle's organon ends up becoming basically the way the West thinks of logic for the next however many thousands of years after it's written, and people are engaging with it. So there's that too, but all that's sort of built on top of Euclid. It all comes out of that.
Emmett, is Euclid pointing to some in this first book? Is he pointing at a bunch of a priori stuff? Like, is that Pythagorean theorem out there?
Is it out there in the world? I mean, that's a I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I'm very interested in the debate around that question, right? Another thing that the seminar is
That's some crafty shit right there.
look, man, if you get schooled in Socratic seminars, you also get schooled in sophistic seminars. Mm. But what I will say is this I personally don't know. I have no idea. I think about that all the time. Obviously, like point is that which has no part. I'm not going to find that amongst my pocket lint in the morning when I'm getting ready for the day. But there is an important discussion to have with others and with yourself about whether or not you believe these things are created or discovered, because there are two very different metaphysics and ideas of truth that come along with that. And they're going to have consequences for a lot of your other thinking, right? And I'm not saying you have to make a decision about that. The Socratic seminar police aren't going to come to your apartment and wake you up, put a gun to your head, and say, "Our scientific discoveries or scientific is math found or created?" But it's well worth spending time with and debating with others, because you'll find that you have a lot of received notions about the nature of truth that you probably didn't know you had until you sit down and try and hash that out with some other people.
Yeah, we have a
Yeah.
lot of everyone does. I mean, you go to school, they ring a bell and you sit down because they have a seating chart and you sit in that chair, and then
Hmm.
they proceed to tell you what is. And then you go read Euclid and start working through these problems. You're like you said, I can't find a line here anywhere, let alone in my pocket lamp.
Hmm.
Where the hell did this line
Yeah.
come from? What is this line? And then what kind of castle am I going to
Hmm.
build on this? Um, and then, like you said, there seems to be some evidence that some of these Indians in the Southwest United States and maybe some uh, peoples in South America had, in parallel, discovered or I don't know. See, I smuggled some stuff in, used some tools
Hmm.
like this as well. Now,
Yeah.
how does that
Great
work?
questions about also, what we want to talk about as what civilization means, and how it is for humans to live together. I mean, science is social. You know, that doesn't mean it's like strictly a political game of polemics. That's a facile point. But it's a human pursuit, which means that humans have participated in trying to understand it in their own ways. So this is shared. These books, these ideas are for everyone. Just like algebra developed by the Muslim world is for everyone as well. We use it all the time. It's incredibly powerful. And it's interesting after you do Euclid that you can take a look at algebra moving westward was terrifying for people who, for generations, had inherited this sort of whole cloth interconnected Euclid world that didn't have, the idea of like zero, or the really intense abstraction of algebra. It takes a long time in Euclid before you're going to start talking about discrete quantities of things. You have to justify the existence of numbers in Euclid,
which is only right to do, I think. But that's one of the things we get to learn. Learn about why it's appropriate to do that, because again, like I said, they ring the bell, we sit in our seat, our assigned seat, and they just commence to tell us. And we've got to go resurrect all of this stuff and reconstruct it when we do this. And I don't know how. I wonder. I'm not part of this world, so I don't know how many people that graduate from college with a bachelor's in mathematics would have done this work. Or I say would have. If somebody's graduating in May right now, I wonder how many of them would actually work through all these propositions, and if people aren't doing
I don't think they are. I mean, this is a niche endeavor for the self-selected. I mean, that's how it is right now, which is one of the beauties of online great books, is that it provides a community and system for people who are the self-selected to engage in these ideas. Like I said, these are the activities of more or less free people. It's an exercise in human freedom to try to understand these.
I know that when you say self-selected, you mean us weirdos.
Yeah.
What do you want to do next? So you said, you called me up and said, "Hey, Hambrick, I sure would like to try this." I'm like, "Do it." Well, what do you want to do next?
Let me think. What would be cool? I mean, honestly, I'd like to do Euclid more. I'd like to do it over the summer. I'd like to offer more of that once I'm done with the finals crush here, and also train up some other seminar hosts so that we can provide this to more and more of our clientele. But I would love to go into. I mean, we study the Timaeus, which is great, and that's going to have some relationship to this stuff. And I would like to maybe do a little Ptolemy, or more importantly, do some Aristotle's physics and the organon. That's like four things.
And that's like four.
But I mean,
things.
Yeah, who knows if we're going to do them
it
all? But they're things that we could do, right? So, one of those next. I mean, I think we'll get to the Aristotle in time. No need to rush to it. But yeah, I think those are well worth spending time with.
Let's do it. Yeah, we'll run Euclid for our members again here as soon as you're able. Probably be, gosh, I don't know. What do you think? Maybe kick that off maybe late May.
Maybe we should talk about it. I have to, like I said, I'm gearing up for finals right now, which is going to swallow my time. But I have also just recently done the Euclid, so I will not have as much upfront study time as I needed this last time we did it. So.
Yeah, we'll kick that off soon, and then we'll add Ptolemy in there. And our first groups, the people that first signed up with us, are getting. I mean, they're going to be wading off into Aristotle here in another couple of months, even. So that those folks will be primed and ready for that pretty soon too.
It's very exciting.
So exciting! Thank you for being brave enough to try this in an online setting and offering that to the first group of people. I look forward to getting more and more, having more and more people walk through this. I think the world would be a better place if we all worked through.
Yeah, I think the world would be a better place if we all had the time and opportunity to work through these things together. Absolutely.
Ben, is there anything that you want to plug? I know that you do some freelance writing and have all kinds of irons in the fires, or anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, you can just Google my name, Emmet Martin Penney. If you participate in the ongoing mind virus that is Twitter, I am there. More hot takes, yeah.
More hot takes.
Scott's seen some of my hot takes when I have used Homer to skewer a couple people. Yeah, so I'm there. I just had a piece on art in relation to politics come out in a publication called Popula. A piece called Smoke Break. I don't know if you have show notes for this stuff. I can send you the link, Scott. We'll put that. I should have some stuff forthcoming later, but there's no need to get into that now because it's not guaranteed yet. I do have, and I don't know when it publishes, a piece on using Euclidean and Lobachevskian ideas of parallelism to think about mourning and loss. And that should be coming out in a literary journal called Ghost Proposal. So, and if anybody's interested, I could write a longer little polemic about the relationship between Euclid and figurative language and its uses and abuses for the OGB blog. But, people can just reach out to me and let me know if they'd like that, and I'll try to carve out some time to make that happen.
Yeah, do that. I want to read that. Well, thank you for recording a little session here with us. Thank you for breaking the ice on the sciences for us at Online Great Books, and thanks for supporting me. You've been encouraging and had your hand on my back and pushed me here and there, and it's been a great help to me, man.
The feeling's mutual, man.
Appreciate you very much.
You've done the same for me. This has been a great thing. I told Scott when I did my first interview for OGB in the back office of a job I was working while I was on the clock, that I had wished in grad school that there had been something like OGB so that I did not, in fact, have to go to grad school to read these things. And I was very excited to see that that's what was kicking off, So it's been a pleasure to be a part of this.
Well, thanks, man. We couldn't have done it without you. There's another Online Great Books podcast. If you've got any questions, you can email it to us at podcast@onlinegreatbooks.com. And if you want to go, do it on your own. Get a group of guys or gals that you know and like, and gather up somewhere with some with pen and paper and a copy of the elements, and work through this stuff on your own. And if you can't get that group together or want us to help you, you can go to onlinegreatbooks.com and you can click the Join Now button and join. And if enrollment is closed, you can join our little VIP waiting list, and then we will we'll make sure that you're one of the first to know when we kick the enrollment door open again next time. Also, one more thing. Help us out by going to iTunes and give us a review. If you give us a good review, that helps us move up in the those weird Apple search algorithms that nobody understands. We know that if you give us a review, it's a big help. And tell a friend about us. That's what we need. That's what we need the most. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you guys.